All right, everyone, we start off today with a mild proposition here. The Biden administration is a threat to democracy. Now, I know what you're going to say. I'm using the term small d democracy. I realize that republic is more apt as a term, but I'm going to use the term that people often conflate with it. They sort of mean the same thing in general parlance. They say, well, the United States is a democracy. Yes, it's a democratic republic. There's a differentiation, but it's meaningless. We all know what is meant, generally speaking, by the use of the term. But not just in the United States. Look, the number of sins against the Constitution by the Biden administration is, at this point, innumerable. You could do a 10-hour video just talking about all of the violations of the law and the ineptitude and the corruption of the Biden admin. By the end, you'd be falling asleep. But I would like to posit that it behooves us to defeat Joe Biden in November and re-elect Donald Trump for another reason, which is also the destabilization that we see around the world. It ties in with diplomacy. The President of the United States is the chief diplomat of the nation. So if something really pops off, he's the one that has to make the phone call or delegate it to someone else. Maybe you have Blinken do it. That's bad. Maybe you have Kamala do it. It's not clear which one is worse. You should get Pete Buttigieg on the phone. At least he's coherent. He's capable of answering questions. He may look like the OSHA poster boy sometimes and be cringe, but he's probably the most sane person in the Biden administration. Probably the most honest, too, which is why a lot of liberals don't like him. The unwillingness of the Biden administration to address the issue of the rise of Euro censorship online, often aimed at U.S. companies, that's a problem. That's a direct threat to free expression in other countries, not just our own. We've seen plenty of threats towards free expression in the United States from the Biden administration. We got the Twitter files and Zuckerberg talking there to Joe Rogan, etc., etc., etc. We've got, again, innumerable examples, but it impacts other people in the world as well. We've got the capability of using U.S. diplomacy to try to increase the liberty of people around the world and try to help people in countries that are allied with us, thus strengthening them, thus making us stronger, because that's the nature of an alliance. But we're not doing that. Instead, there's a denigration of that sort of symbiotic relationship, you could say. The Biden administration, for example, if it were sane, right now would be encouraging Taiwan to take up a Swiss model with regards to self-defense and the ownership of weapons. Instead, they send them some missiles and they send a ship over there once in a while to float around the island just to look at the Chinese ships that are right offshore. It's an insane foreign policy. We see, for example, the weakness of U.S. diplomatic efforts right now leading to what's happening in Ukraine. We have no willingness to call out Ukraine for its own systemic corruption. We had, for instance, let me give you one example out of many. I'll just give you one. Belarus, a few weeks ago, decided to crack down on religious edifices, right, on the church there, and sort of bring them in line with state policy. And the Western media howled bloody murder about it. But it was literally nothing more than Zelensky did in Ukraine with regards to the Orthodox Church, and Putin has done this as well a number of times. It's a hypocrisy. It's systemic hypocrisy, systemic incoherence in foreign policy, for instance, with Gaza and Israel. The United States will say, well, you're going too far in Gaza, but then it'll say, but we've always completely got your back. With regards to the Philippines, well, the government there is authoritarian, but we unequivocally support you against China. The foreign policy is causing a mess around the world, in other nations with more or less functioning democratic systems. Some of them are more functional than others. Some of them are left-leaning governments, some of them are right-leaning governments. We have a government incapable of conducting basic diplomacy with parts of Eastern Europe. You had the Biden administration openly castigating Poland and Hungary last year, for example. These are republics. We have basically ignoring Javier Milei in Argentina, another major player in the Latin American states. We've got the Biden administration says nothing as Jair Bolsonaro is indicted down in Brazil, probably because the Biden administration is doing the same thing to usurp democracy in the United States with its persecution of Donald Trump. We have no calling out of the heavy-handed censorship and the crackdown on protesters, depending on the kind of protesters, in Canada. Our closest neighbor, a nation that's very, very near and dear to U.S. in terms of diplomacy, basically America's hat, and nothing is done about it. There's no attempt to influence other nations. It's very reactive, the Biden administration. This is a big problem. Whereas normally, and this is the case for both Democratic and Republican administrations, by the way, this is a nonpartisan thing. Normally, the United States, you've got a bunch of diplomatic visits by your leader, by your president, or the VP or whatever, and they talk to foreign dignitaries and foreign heads of state, and they try to influence other countries because they say, look, the United States is a big economy. We're a big country. We've got big diplomatic capabilities, and so we sort of swing that around, and we try. The hope is that you try to help people in other countries, in other functioning Republican systems. Under the Biden administration, we don't have that. We have a very reactive footing, one which is very weak and feckless. And it's partially the responsibility of the fact that Joe Biden is not quite with it. And so you have multiple people behind the scenes with their own differentials on what they think foreign policy should be, putting forth their ideas, and then Biden obviously, at least on paper, needs to sign off on them. And you have a person who is known, his former staffers complained of this, is known for being like a McClellan, being very indecisive. Sort of like a Hillary Clinton needing a focus group in order to know what to say at a rally, or something like that. That sort of weakness and that sort of incoherence in foreign policy does not just endanger the public in the United States, because the United States is so diplomatically and militarily powerful. It endangers people in all of the states that are allied with us. Again, most of them are functioning republics. Some of them are kind of sort of republics. You know, it's a representative system, but it's still Her Majesty's government and stuff like that, like a Commonwealth state, like Great Britain or something like that, or technically France. So you have El Presidente, and then you have Prime Minister, and I don't 100% know exactly what the difference between those two roles is in all the countries, and it kind of differs. Like, you have the same thing in Russia, you have the same thing in Israel, actually, as well, and it's rather unfortunate. The Biden administration is a threat to democracy, for example, in Ukraine. Not calling out the Zelensky regime and attempting to coerce it to reform as a basis for getting aid, or something along those lines. You know, you dangle the carrot and then you wield the stick, that sort of thing. There's no attempt to really shore up Taiwan. Again, the breakaway province from what was China, with the government in exile. Legitimately, all of China is just West Taiwan. That should also be a foreign policy that we adopt. Even Trump doesn't have the balls to do that. We don't lean on anyone to adopt more liberty. In fact, turn a blind eye to Euro censorship online, etc., etc., etc. This happened in the Middle East. There have been attempts before, even under the dark days of Bush-Obama, there was an attempt to try to address some of the systemic problems in certain Middle Eastern countries, even while we were bombing others, of course. There's no such attempt under Joe Biden. It's literally just dropping bombs. A couple of drone strikes and mission accomplished. All you need is the big banner and for Joe Biden to fly in on Marine One or something like that, and that seals the deal. Joe Biden is a threat not to just the U.S. representative system of government, through his persecution of political enemies, and not just Trump. Eric Adams would be on that list, by the way, among many, many others. We've seen that. But to many other nations in the world. And we're regressing, unfortunately. On a worldwide stage, internationally right now, liberty is in regress. It's not outgrowthing. There's no expansion of liberty like there has been for a couple of centuries. It's a retraction of liberty. It's a retraction of the gains that were made through the revolutionary period, the period of the 19th century into the atomic era, during which the West said, well, you know, we're going to counterbalance all these authoritarian systems in the East by attempting, in general, to expand liberty. At the very least, in word, if not in deed, we're going to adulate free expression. We're going to adulate the ability of people to defend themselves and be human beings and individuals, as opposed to just being part of some commie collective. Well, that's been killed by the Biden administration. That lasted through the goddamn Bush-Obama years. Even then, at least lip service was paid to it. It's definitely imperfect, but at least an attempt was made on paper. You don't have that under Joe Biden. He can talk a big game about protecting democracy, but his version of protecting democracy is undermining it. And so he's a threat to far more than just the United States, and people need to be aware of that when they go to the ballot box in November. That's about all. Peace out.